viewers. Our guest today is Mr. Gary Mond, a very prominent advocate of the State of Israel. He has been observing the situations since the October 7th Hamas program in Israel, and he has also been observing the ongoing Israel's operation against Hamas in Gaza. So welcome, Mr. Gary Mond, to this interview.
Thank you.
First of all, please tell us that, as you know, that now Israeli Defense Forces, they are continuing their operation against the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. And we are seeing that Hamas terrorists are taking shelter inside hospitals, inside schools, and using the civilians as human shields. Would you very kindly tell us more about this?
Yes, I think first of all, to say to use civilians as human shield and to shelter in a hospital where there are sick people who are incapable of moving, usually incapable of moving, is a war crime. Let's call it what it is. It is a war crime. And it's really what lies behind it is the fact that Hamas are far too cowardly to actually fight in the open. The difference between Hamas and Israel is Hamas uses civilians to protect itself, whereas Israel is out there protecting its civilians. That's the fundamental difference between the two. When we say Hamas is a terrorist group, we just have to look at what they do to confirm that they are in fact terrorists after the massacres of the 7th of October, and also going back the last 15 to 20 years, constant types of activity designed to murder Israeli civilians.
As we know that main founder behind Hamas, although we were knowing Iran, but now we know since 2007, Qatar has been spending millions of dollars towards Hamas. Qatar is also harboring, giving shelter to terrorist kingpins of Hamas, such as Ismail Haniyeh. They are living in Doha. So when we are all talking about Iran patronizing Hamas, which is true, but at the same time, Qatar is actually one of the biggest funders of Hamas. If we are demanding sanctions on Iran, and there are sanctions on Iran for patronizing terrorism, why there should not be sanctions on Qatar for funding Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza?
I completely agree with you. I think that the reason that Qatar has not been in the spotlight for sanctions is because a lot of it has been behind the scenes and not well known, whereas Iran, of course, is actually out there in the open saying that it wants to destroy the state of Israel, whereas Qatar doesn't say that sort of thing, anything like so often. However, in the last 6 to 7 weeks, the role of Qatar has become much more clear. I think that there should be sanctions on Qatar. I think that Qatar, from everything I've read and heard, is funding Hamas, has been funding Hamas, and any rapprochement with Qatar is unacceptable. The reason that there is not a clamour now for sanctions on Qatar is because Qatar is perceived to have an instrumental role with the hostage negotiation. There's still 240 Israeli, not just Israeli, citizens of other countries, hostages that are being kept in Gaza, and Qatar is believed to be able to help in liberating them. I don't know if that's true or not. This is all kept very, very secret. But I think that is the reason why nobody is saying anything about Qatar right now. That will change, hopefully, after the war.
So you are hoping that Qatar will also come to the limelight as a terror funder in the very near future?
I think so, yes.
Okay, and you know, and we know that Qatar and Arab countries, they are spending billions of dollars of their zakat fund towards media in the non-Arab, let's say, in the international media. And we are witnessing that every time Western media, starting from the New York Times to the BBC, CNN, and of course, Qatari Al Jazeera, they are trying to give coverage to the terrorists, and they are trying to twist the information, use the information against Israel and the Jews. So this is a scenario when billions of dollars are going to the media towards buying their voice, and we, those you and I, those who we are in favor of peace, those who are against anti-Semitism and against Holocaust denial. So we are not really finding a platform which can publish the information in the correct way. I mean, this is the kind of the media hostility towards Israel and the Jewish population. What is your opinion about that?
You're completely correct. This is a huge problem, and it's seen mostly on university campuses around the world, many of which have taken, the old English expression is they've taken the shilling, which means they've taken funding from radical Islamist groups, and there has to be a solution to try to mean that we don't take money from such groups. But you see, money is very tempting, and certainly university campuses, certainly the newspapers, and in many other areas of society, we do see the influence of monies which essentially come from people who wish to back the fundamentalist Islamist terrorists. And that is very, very worrying. And it's a problem all over the world. Sorry, I'm just going to finish off. The only thing that, however, the most important thing that matters is that Israel is strong on the ground militarily. And when this war is over and Hamas is completely destroyed, then there might be a review of the spending of such monies.
I'm now saying something based on solid information and evidence that for many years, Qatar is funding the US colleges and universities. And they are particularly funding those faculties which are generating journalists, those which are generating diplomats, those which are generating analysts. So in other words, by funding those students in the US academia, Qatar is breeding anti-Semitic, Jew-hating, Israel-hating journalists, diplomats, and analysts in the Western world. And the most fearful fact here is, Mr. Garamond, that eventually these children, these students, on completion of their academic career, they will enter big media, diplomatic jobs, and very many important places where they will behave as monsters supporting radical Islam and terrorism. What is your opinion about these aspects?
Well, it's even worse, because it's not just a question of the situation with regard to Israel. It's also a question of the breeding of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred in major Western countries. We are seeing it particularly badly in the United States on university campuses. And we see, as you've just said, that this spreads over into the mainstream media when graduates from these places take jobs in organizations like New York Times and others. The main point is that the indigenous populations of countries who have not got any particular bias either for Israel or against Israel, it is for them to wake up and see what's happening. It's believed that in the United Kingdom, when you look at, in spite of them having 300,000 people on a demonstration, when the surveys are done of ordinary British people, what they think of Israel or Hamas, it's 10-1 in favor of Israel. But it may sound very good to be 10-1 in favor of Israel, but many of the people who are in favor of Israel are quiet. They don't talk. They don't make their views widely known. Whereas 1 in 11 who are in favor of Hamas scream and shout from the hilltops. I have to tell you that the more they scream and shout, actually, among ordinary people, the less support they get. Now, this coming weekend, I'm going to be speaking at a rally organised by Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, which is one of the major Christian groups. I'm hoping they will have 15,000 people, which may not be like 300,000 people, but it will be enough to demonstrate that ordinary people who are not Jewish in the United Kingdom do still support Israel. This is a battle that is not going to be over just in the duration of the war in Israel. This is a battle that's going to last years and decades. And it's going to be for organizations, both Jewish and Christian, and for that matter, any other religion, to support, to fight against the left-wing, the far left-wing Islamist Jew haters.
Mr. Garimond, following the 9/11 terrorist attack on US soil, we have seen that US took all-out efforts in somehow finding the perpetrators behind the 9/11 terrorist attack and to make sure that it never happens again. Now, on the October 7, 2023, the Hamas pogrom, if we compare the number of casualties during 9/11, it was something like 3,000. And on October 7, it was 1,400 plus. But if we compare the geographic size of the United States and Israel, so October 7 Hamas pogrom was far bigger, far bigger than the 9/11 terrorist attack.
Yes, I did the maths as well. And there were, if you take the 1,500 Israelis murdered, and the United States has got a population of 35 times the population of Israel, you multiply 35 by 1,500 and you get 55,000 people, whereas 9/11 only cost the lives of 3,000. It was 15 times worse.
Yes. Now, what is the most alarming scenario is after 9/11, everyone in the West were talking against the radical Islam and terrorism. Unfortunately, after the October 7th Hamas pogrom, which is, as you say, 50 times bigger than the 9/11, unfortunately, we are seeing the unruly Hamas supporters bringing out so-called protests in the Western cities, including the United Kingdom. They are tearing down the posters of the missing hostages. They are even attacking Jewish people, Jewish students, and even synagogues. I mean, this is an alarming situation. And
of course it is.
How those Western nations, including the United Kingdom, who claim to be civilized, how those civilized governments are allowing such thuggish activities of the supporters and the activists of Hamas terrorists.
They are not. I can speak for the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, there is a lot of unhappiness among the Jewish community and in our friends of the Jewish community that the British government is not doing enough. The British government should have banned the march of 300,000 people last Saturday. I know that in France and Germany, they do at least make efforts. And in France, they have banned militant Islamist marches. And indeed, they had a march of, I think, 100,000 Jews and friends of Jews in Paris just a few days ago. In Britain, we're not doing enough. Quite frankly, we are using excuses to stop using pathetic excuses, saying, oh, but you don't have to go anywhere near the march, you can stay away. All these pathetic excuses to stop the banning. We want to see radical Islam kept off the streets of London. And that is not what, and every other city in the United Kingdom for that matter. And unfortunately, that is not what is happening. Every effort is being made to lobby the government. We were also very disappointed that one of our champions in the government, a lady called Suella Braverman, who was our Home Secretary, was sacked on Monday. And we are not sure what the government is going to do next. But the whole situation is very, very unsatisfactory. anti-Semitism has risen massively in the last 6 weeks, and indeed there are quite a lot of Jews in Britain who are thinking of leaving the country.
We have seen just a few days yesterday, actually, U.S. Secretary of State Mr. Anthony Blinken has called upon UK to to impose sanctions on Hamas supporters. It just happened yesterday. He tweeted. So these protesters, what I call them hooligans, the pro-Hamas protesters, they are supporters of Hamas. And
Correct.
if US is talking about imposing sanctions, sanctions should be imposed on those people. They should be deported from the UK, number one. Number two is I was a little bit shocked when the UK Home Secretary was abruptly sacked. I don't know what are the details, but she was sacked for her article, criticizing Hamas. So under such scenarios, why the UK not? I don't think UK should only ban this kind of pro-Hamas hooliganism. It is time that UK should absolutely deport these troublemakers, because UK doesn't want the existence of Islamists in the land. Do you agree?
Yeah, if it is legally possible to deport any Islamist, I would be in favour of it. However, many of them were born and brought up in the UK. They actually were born here, and unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about that. Which is, I actually feel that there needs to be some much tougher legal sanctions against Islamism. I differentiate that between the religion of being a Muslim, and I focus on the political aspects of Islam, which are totally unacceptable in this country. I would say, just come back to your earlier point, that those marching, many of them, not all of them, many of them are Hamas supporters. Either they are Islamists or they are just far left-wing agitators. The rest, who are not Hamas supporters, are what I would call naive and gullible people who don't seem to understand what's behind the calls for a ceasefire. The calls for a ceasefire are calls for Hamas to have time to regroup and rearm and to attack Israel again. That is what lies behind it all. And there are many people, maybe even half of the people demonstrating, I don't know, but there are many people who are just naive and gullible and just don't understand. Because you see, the word ceasefire sounds very, very nice. It sounds very friendly and very attractive, but they don't realize that the ceasefire would never be a ceasefire for Hamas, it would be a ceasefire for Israel. And that would be a disaster at the present time. So, in summary, number one, we have to realize that we need to get the message across as to what the ceasefire actually means. And number two, we have to take much firmer actions to the extent we're allowed to against the Islamists who are essentially promoting Hamas.
Sir, I'd like to remind you that under the international conventions and UN conventions, calling for ceasefire under this current situation is tantamount to war crime. So those who are demanding ceasefire, they are committing war crime. Actually, Israel is not continuing a war against Hamas. Israel is continuing a war against terror.
I think that's a good way of putting it. I would add to that, though. Israel is conducting a war to save Israel as well. It's a war against terror, and it's a war for Israel's security. It is a great shame that not enough other countries realize it. There are one or two countries around the world who do realize it. I mean, in the Czech Republic was so appalled at what was going on at the United Nations that they've even discussed leaving it. So it's not completely a disaster zone. There are some countries that do see things in a sensible way, but the vast majority, unfortunately, are beholden to the United Nations, and the United Nations is virulently anti-Israel and always has been.
For many years, I have been saying that United Nations has become a dirty diaper. Anyway, but Israel is not only fighting Hamas for its own security, Israel is fighting Hamas for the sake of the security of that region and the world. Because the way Hamas is
Yes, it
growing,
is. That's a very good way of putting it. I
but the
agree.
way, sir, the way Hamas is growing and growing and growing with Qatari money and Iranian money and many other funds, this Hamas will very soon become a serious threat to most of the Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia. It will become a serious threat to the United States and rest of the Western countries. So it is not Israel's war for its own security alone. It's Israel's war for the global peace and global security. And anyone trying to stop this war, or I don't say war, stop Israel from combating terrorism, actually, whoever it is, including United Nations, they are uh, playing the role of an appeaser of terrorism.
Right. That's right. I would say the first thing I would say is what can Israel do and what can't Israel do? Israel can win this war and it can get rid of Hamas as long as we don't have the Americans making life difficult for them. As long as the Americans continue to at least tolerate what's happening, Israel will win the war and it will get rid of Hamas. But what it will get rid of Hamas is it will get rid of Hamas from Gaza and possibly even Judea and Samaria. What it cannot do, what Israel can't do, is get rid of the ideas, the mental thought process of supporting an entity like Hamas. It's a bit like the Nazis. What happened with the Nazis at the Second World War is Germany was defeated completely, and Nazism on German soil and in Europe was vanquished totally. But the idea of being a Nazi, today there are people who are Nazis, and you can't affect how people think. All you can do 6 months or a year's time between Israel and Saudi Arabia, one of the conditions will be that Saudi Arabia will stop the funding, to the best of its ability, the funding of terror.
Sir, you are talking to a newspaper which is publishing for the more than 20 years from Bangladesh. And please, our newspaper is publishing the truth and confronting anti-Semitism, confronting Holocaust denial, and defending the state of Israel. So
Thank you. I'm very delighted to hear that.
If we can do this for 20 plus years, why others cannot do this?
Well, I'm hoping that when the war is over, this is an issue that will be highlighted a lot with Arab countries. I think as a minimum, we should have this in the countries that have agreements with Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Sudan. I think it's possible. I think it's quite possible. It will need some amount of finance, but not huge sums. Just needs to be got going. Yes, I agree.
Being a strong defender of the state of Israel, because we are at the last part of our interview, so would you like to please tell something to the international community who would be watching this interview, what the world should do in favor of Israel's ongoing war against terror?
That's fairly easy. What the world should do is allow Israel to get on with the job. It should not be making these ridiculous calls for a ceasefire, which are against the interests of Israel and the rest of the world for that matter. It should focus on other issues that may be more important. Let Israel finish the job. That's the big message I have. Let Israel finish the job. Do not start trying to advise Benjamin Netanyahu and his government as to what to do at any level at all. Let them finish the job. They have a job to do. They have to win this war. They have to destroy Hamas completely. They have to free the hostages. Let them do it.
We were talking to Mr. Gary Mond from UK, and Mr. Gary Mond is a very esteemed individual who has been advocating for the state of Israel for decades. And we are very much grateful to you, Mr. Gary Mond, for kindly granting our time. And we hope that we will meet you again soon with this issue, because this is not something that we can cover only in one interview. And we will see you soon in the near future with more to discuss about this Israel's ongoing war against Hamas.
Thank you, Shoaib. It's been my pleasure.